if you clicked on this video, I don't have to explain anything. You know what we're doing. We are ranking the Marvel Cinematic Universe TV shows and movies. Let's do it. What is up, Flick fans? Welcome back to my channel. Today we are talking the Marvel Cinematic Universe and placing the movies and TV shows on tiers. We've done it 1,000 times. You know how this works. Inevitably, there will be questions, and for good reason. Where are the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films? Why is Daredevil not on this list? Well, we're only talking the movies and TV shows created under the Marvel Studios banner solely other than Tom Holland's Spider-Man movies. We can talk multiverse all day, and whatever they're planning with Daredevil, we still don't know how soft of a reboot that's going to be. And with the multiverse, I could include the X-Men movies, because they're all technically one now, but we're going to keep it simple and save that huge Marvel ranking for another video on another day. But if you guys are here and you have a ranking of all of these MCU films, 1 through 4, be sure to drop them in the comments down below and let me know what you think of my list. Don't hurt me mentally. Nah, it's the internet. You can do whatever you want to, and you're going to. But let's take a look at this tier list, and you will see that there is no awful tier. I truly believe that every movie in the MCU is either bad or higher, and I'm a massive fan of this franchise, so I'm going to be a little more positive than maybe people want to see. But at the end of the day, I save the awful tier for movies that are just, I mean, the Fantastic Four movie in 2015, or Elektra. Yeah, that one. We'll try to go quick. I tend to not shut up. Let's start with Iron Man, another character who likes to talk. Listen, we know what Robert Downey Jr. did with this first film. We know how iconic and that status that movie will hopefully forever be on. It is insanely good. And going back and rewatching this, you see how simple the story is, and maybe that simplicity shines through a little bit in the third act. It's not as thoroughly like over-the-top enjoyable like other Marvel movies, but as a whole, the final product and the fact that they brought it all together, it's really, really impressive, and that's why, we're putting the first Iron Man on the awesome tier. I could see how that's an all-timer for a lot of people, but I'm saving that for the ones that are like 10 out of 10 for me, right? The next movie on this list, we're sticking with the trilogy here and going right into Iron Man 2, a movie that I feel as if it just didn't know what it wanted to be. Is this solely intended to be a transition film into the Avengers? Well, it tries to do that. Is it trying to deal with Tony Stark's demons? Well, it tries to do that. And then we're introducing new concepts and characters. Whiplash is the perfect example of a villain that had a really great concept, especially when you look at the comics, but did not come to fruition. Sam Rockwell is incredible in this movie, and I want more of him in the future. But as of now, looking at this film on its surface, it just, it does not work as a cohesive unit, although there are great things in the movie. Iron Man 3. Now, this one is somewhat tough because I started out kind of cold on Iron Man 3, and I've come around a bit more over the years. Am I still, on the level that I was of it just doesn't accomplish what its goals are? No, because I actually think it is accomplishing what it's trying to do. Strip everything back for Tony Stark, down to not even having a suit. He has a shell of a suit with his little friend in this film, and I like seeing that. I like seeing Tony Stark go in and save the day as opposed to Iron Man. So in that way, the first 2 acts of this film, they work really well. Now, the whole Mandarin twist, as a fan of the Mandarin in the comics, it hurt me. It really, really hurt me. But since then, they played that story out well and almost kind of made that a bit better for me in Shang Chi. So that's not as much of a criticism as it was. It's cool how we can retroactively look back on these films. I still have issues with the third act. There are clear problems there. The disposable nature of his suits and what they do with Pepper, and I am the Mandarin, and I'm just like, I don't care. Ben Kingsley is great in the film, but then what they do with him, okay. Regardless, the first 2 acts play much better as I go back and revisit this movie more, and I can see the praises for this film, and it has raised just enough for me to actually put this on the good tier. I'm going very low good tier with Iron Man 3, but I've warmed up over the years. So, there, I have a heart. All right, here's where we're getting into my favorite Avenger, Captain America, Steve Rogers. What an incredible story arc. He starts out as the guy that would do anything and sacrifice his life for anyone and be the hero, right? But where we see him end up, he makes that personal and somewhat selfish decision, but one that you completely understand, and at least I got behind why he made it. I think it's one of the best character arcs in the MCU, and Steve Rogers he is that character for me. He means so much to me. That translation from the comics into live action, changing up one or two minor things, but for the most part, keeping what you love about Cap in the comics, but in my opinion, making him a better character. I prefer the live action interpretation of the character to the comic book versions that I've read, and that's a rare thing for me to say. So all in all, we start out strong with Captain America, the first Avenger. I'm not as big a fan of Joe Wright's direction, but it works for what it's trying to do. Sure, it montages its way through some integral moments, but you have Red Skull as the villain, and you have a really compelling story, and one that has an ending that will hit you in all of the feels. It's also a period piece that accurately captures the period, in my opinion, and feels of that time, and I loved seeing that in this movie. I'm not going to say this film gets a bad rep, but in my opinion, it may just be the most underrated film in the MCU, and that's why I'm going great tier with Captain America, the first Avenger. Next up, it's the Winter Soldier, and if this is your first time tuning in, first off, hello. I like to talk about movies, and I make really cheesy dumb jokes at the beginning of my videos, but not this one. But you may not be aware of the consistent praise that I've been giving this movie over the last several years, since 2014. Actually, you know what? It took me a couple of rewatches to get to where I am now, but I am now saying The Winter Soldier is always in the argument for my favorite movie in the MCU. It strips everything down from what we knew of Cap in the first film, in the Avengers, and sends him in a new direction. It's a thriller at its core, and this is when the Russo brothers are at their best, is when they're a bit more grounded with their stories, right? Obviously, the Avengers movies, they're not grounded, they're crazy, they're outlandish. For me, their darker tone and even their darker visual style, it works so well in Winter Soldier because it is firmly in that genre. That's why I'm excited for their new film coming out in a couple of weeks. But you look at the action scenes, the villain, two villains in this movie, both work very, very well. Everything about this story pieces together so perfectly, and even when it gets big in the third act, which some people took issue with, I didn't mind that because the action is still personal enough and the stakes are high enough to where you don't mind all of these visual effects coming in and it getting crazy and slightly outlandish. It's fun, it's entertaining, it's everything you want in a final act, but it's also everything you want in a build-up and almost this brotherhood type story. And y'all know how I feel about brotherhood type stories. I'm putting The Winter Soldier on the all-time tier. It's 100% an all-time movie for me. And finally, the third film in the trilogy, this is Captain America Civil War. How do you fit all of these characters in here without making it feel like an Avengers movie? And I guess there are moments that do make it feel like an Avengers movie, but for the most part, it still keeps Captain America at its core and Winter Soldier kind of right over here on the side. Then you have Iron Man's story arc and starting out with Tony Stark and getting those flashbacks to when he was younger and bringing those three characters together with this really personal, high-stakes, still somewhat grounded battle at the end of the film. You could make an argument that that battle is more impactful than the airport battle, but I'm not having as much fun. Listen, the airport battle, watching that in the theater for the first time, all of our characters going at it in a parking lot, but not in that way. Well, that sounded weird. I see a lot of people would pay to see that, though. Henry Jackman is the most underrated composer in the MCU. His score for Winter Soldier, his score for Civil War is amazing, in my opinion. I saw some complaints as, when the movie first came out, right? It didn't have, that same theme music for Captain America, but it would come in every now and then, but they'd also bring this spy espionage element to it that I thought just sounded amazing. You add that to an already incredibly entertaining movie. I've talked about this enough. Y'all know where this is going. Civil War, all-time tier. Let's go. Next up, Doctor Strange. The first Doctor Strange, a movie that my wife is in love with. I think this is her favorite standalone MCU movie, but it's one of those that so many people have this affection and affinity for because Scott Derrickson brought something to this first Doctor Strange film that played just enough into the outlandish and then just enough into the darkness, but it also kept that psychedelic feel for the most part that Doctor Strange has in the comics. It added those things together to create for a very compelling origin story. I think Doctor Strange is a good, really good origin story for a character that was going to take a lot for us to get behind, and he's not the best character at the beginning of the movie, like he's kind of a jerk, but as are other characters in the MCU, but the movie does a great job of allowing you to warm up on him to the point to where you believe in Infinity War and Endgame, he's making the best decisions because you trust him to make those decisions. I think a lot of that comes from this first Doctor Strange movie. The villain, he's not, Mads Mikkelsen, love him to death. You're great, man. Not your best role. So that's my big miss with the movie. But the battle with Dormammu somewhat makes up for that. I'm putting Doctor Strange, the first one, on the great tier. I think it's a great movie. Multiverse of Madness. I'm talking too much. I'm going to try to speed it up. Listen, I have watched this film twice now. I really enjoyed it my first time watching it. I thought there were some issues with the first act, and I was trying my best to get into the story, but it was moving so quickly. And it's funny because I have a similar complaint with Thor Love and Thunder. Once we settled in and got into everything that was going on, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Look, I know the Illuminati stuff. People take issue with how fast they went out, but I was so impressed with how big and how much of a villain they made Wanda in this movie. You buy it, you believe it. Yes, her turn is a bit quick in the first act, but it really does go off of what they established at the end of WandaVision and the Darkhold. It's something that people aren't talking about. They're like, why would Wanda do this? Why would she kill these people? And yes, she does take it a bit far. Sam Raimi giving us these really visually, oh my God, scenes. Like my wife watched it for the first time and she goes, this is really dark. And I said, yeah, it is really dark. Thanks, Sam Raimi. But it's the Darkhold. It's taking a hold of her mind. We see how bad it messes up Doctor Strange in another reality and kind of at the end of this movie. But I enjoyed what they did with her, and I thought Olsen crushed this role. She crushed it. My biggest issue beyond that pacing in the first act is just the title, Multiverse of Madness. They go through some multiverses at the beginning and then go to some different worlds, but we never get the Multiverse of Madness. We get a compelling story with Wanda and a really compelling story with Doctor Strange. Are you happy? The question that's constantly being posed to him. And some amazing, crazy, wacky techniques that Sam Raimi uses, and I loved them. I was here for them. I ate them up. But I do feel as if it was called like Doctor Strange versus Scarlet Witch. People's expectations would not have been as multiverse lofty. Regardless, I'm putting Multiverse of Madness on the good tier. I enjoyed it. Slight disappointment with those expectations, but still a good film. Guardians of the Galaxy is a ton of fun. It did exactly what it needed to do for me the first time, bringing in characters that I never imagined they would be able to make them translate to the big screen, yet they did it. An amazing cast. I think Chris Pratt is so good as Star-Lord, but everyone, right? Bradley Cooper's voice, Vin Diesel just saying, I am Groot, Zoe Saldana, Dave Bautista. Look, Ronan is not the most compelling villain in the world, but the more I watch this movie, the more I'm like, yeah, I understand why he's not the focus, because you have to bring this team together. You have to give them something to fight, but you don't want to take away from the time that we spend with them. And that has become less prevalent for me over the years, and I've actually enjoyed the movie more because of that. Can't say enough about the soundtrack or James Gunn's direction. This one is easy. It's going on the awesome tier. And then we move into the sequel that is somewhat divisive still to this day. It kind of feels like Multiverse of Madness type deal where some people just don't love what it did. They think it's too jokey. Other people love how funny it is. And it's crazy because I feel as if the reception for Thor Love and Thunder will be similar, because to me, they're extremely similar movies. There are story beats that are similar, and you have that mix of humor that takes it a bit far, and that was always my issue with Volume 2, is I didn't laugh as much as the first. Same thing with Love and Thunder, we'll get into that. But I still really enjoy this film, and I've warmed up. Like, my reception has gotten more, you know what? I can have fun with it and not worry as much about the jokes that don't land and focus on the ones that do. And the ones that do are fantastic. But you also have that Yondu storyline with Star-Lord that is extremely compelling. And the way that they end that off at the end of this movie is pretty awesome. So I am putting Guardians Volume 2 on the good tier because it's definitely a fun movie. Next up is Ant-Man. Look, I think this movie slept on, right? Yeah, he's the little hero that shrinks up and down and crawls into Thanos' butt. I mean, he didn't do that, but they did it on The Boys. It wasn't fun. Well, it was, but it wasn't. This film is really compelling. The relationship between Scott Lang and really everyone in this movie is so good. Michael Pena, I think that friendship is the funniest aspect of the film. His character is just so freaking likable, and I love how he carries over into the second, but this first one is where he truly shines, whether it be his storytelling or just the delivery of those jokes. I have so much fun every time he's on screen, but everyone in this movie crushes. The introduction of Wasp, before she is Wasp, Evangeline Lilly. Yellow Jacket, no, he's not the most compelling villain we've ever seen, but he does exactly what he needs to do. That's an ongoing theme with this tier list so far, and that fight scene at the end, as small scale and somewhat ridiculous as it is, I laugh, I chuckle, and I'm entertained every time I watch this. It's a heist film, and yes, it's simple. It doesn't do anything magnificent, but it didn't really need to. Ant-Man slept on. It's going on the great tier. I don't care. Ants. Now, Ant-Man and the Wasp. It retains that humor that I still think is great. Any time we are with Paul Rudd in this movie and he's cracking jokes, I'm dying laughing. Michael Pena is amazing. Kind of the fallout of what we've seen prior in the MCU. Scott Lang locked up and all of these side characters coming in and out. Those are great. And then Janet Van Dyne comes into the picture. Hank Pym is, as rock solid as ever. Everyone's good in this movie. And Wasp is actually a super compelling character. She's great. For me, what makes this less of an authentic experience is the plot, the villain, and the third act that gives us a chase scene. And when a movie casts Walton Goggins and doesn't make Walton Goggins compelling or give him an interesting role in its entirety, and one of the more forgettable characters I've seen in an MCU movie, well, that's a big disappointment at the end of the day. Ant-Man and the Wasp goes on the okay tier. I wish it was more memorable. Spider-Man, I dressed for this occasion. Ah! Yeah, I didn't want to take the time to put the entire suit on. I also don't know how this looks because I can't see anything. We'll find out when it's over, but I have a large head, so probably not great. Let's start with Homecoming. Listen, John Watts took this and made it, and the comparison was going crazy that year. Ferris Bueller's Day Off with Spider-Man. Is it that? Well, not necessarily, but it does take cues from that. John Hughes, cues. It takes cues and it implements that humor, and I truly believe the humor in Homecoming is great. I thought it worked oh so well. It's a coming-of-age story. His relationship with Ned is great. I wasn't huge on MJ in the first film. She progressively gets better, but I do kind of like what they started to build up. But you bring in Michael Keaton as Vulture and what he was doing as this character, not as much in the action department because we never truly got a great action scene in this film, but that banter and the moment he figures out he is Spider-Man, I truly love. Now, I'm biased because I love Spider-Man, but I love so many things about this movie. I'm putting Homecoming on the great tier. Next up, we're going Spider-Man Far From Home, and I'll be honest with you, I thought this was just a slight step down from Homecoming. I still thoroughly enjoyed the movie. I loved what they did with Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio. He gets his moments, and they are so much fun. Not everyone loves the take on Mysterio. Not everyone loves the humor in this film, and that was my issue. I wasn't laughing as much in the first act. It didn't quite have that magic that Homecoming had, but once we go on this trip abroad and everything starts to happen, really, when we get that twist with Mysterio, something that, it's funny because you got a similar one in Iron Man 3, but this one we knew it was coming. How are they going to do it? And the way that they did it and Jake Gyllenhaal selling that was so great. These Spider-Man movies, they are just a ton of fun. And it's hard not to enjoy them every single time I watch them. So I come away thinking they're all great experiences. Far From Home, not as great as Homecoming, but I am still going the great. It's hard to see. Great tier? Is that it? Maybe. It's too hot. It's too hot. Thor, hammer. Spider-Man No Way Home. Listen, what an amazing experience this film was. Like, one of the best theater experiences I have ever had. It wasn't necessarily a surprise with how much fun we had seeing Toby and Andrew return, because a lot of people speculated. Now, some people were genuinely shocked. I was not one of those. I expected it to happen. It happened. And it was awesome. And I loved every moment with those characters. But without them, is it a great, compelling movie? And my answer is, I think it works extremely well. Tom Holland, what he does in this film, giving his best performance yet as Spider-Man, but surrounded by people giving amazing performances. Andrew Garfield, Willem Dafoe, the returning villains, the new characters, Doctor Strange's inclusion. There are so many things that work so well about this film. My major complaints come with the style. I don't think John Watts fully executes on the visual style, even though there are certain scenes, the scene where he's staring at the billboard with J.K. Simmons. I mean, that's an incredible looking shot. It's a big green screeny battle at the end, yes, but the moments where we strip all of those things down, say he's fighting Green Goblin the 2 times in the film, those 2 scenes, oh my God, incredible. And then the Peters working together, the Peter Parkers. I have to learn how to phrase things better. This is really hard.
That's what she said.
The experience alone is worthy of a high tier. I can't quite put it on the all-time tier. Listen, these other films, they've had time to get there, and I've seen them countless times. We're still less than a year removed from No Way Home, but I am going to easily put it on the awesome tier. It's just an experience, and one that I'll never forget. Now, let's talk about some of these standalone films. The first one, The Incredible Hulk, often referred to as like the black sheep of the MCU, the one that people, they don't really go back to, they don't think about. My wife and I just watched it for her first time ever. She had never seen it. So I'm like, how'd you know who General Thunderbolt Ross was? And she said, I didn't. I was like, oh, well. Let's just say this rewatch put some things into perspective for me. I have always wholeheartedly defended this film, and I've said it's better than people give it credit for. It's really not that bad of a movie. And even though I don't think it's bad, it's definitely not good. Rewatching this hurt my enjoyment. And it makes me go back and look at some of my other tier lists and say, well, you probably should have just rewatched it. And because it's been a couple years, right? Fairly recently, but going back, dissecting the dialogue, which is just not good. Betty Ross, that relationship, not good. No chemistry. Edward Norton is not bad as this character, for sure. But the dialogue, it's rough. The third act with Abomination, it's great. It keeps it from being on the bad tier, but I am going to put this on the meh tier. It just, it didn't work this time around. Captain Marvel, there's a lot to love about Captain Marvel. I thought Samuel L. Jackson was great in this film. The inclusion of the Skrulls is really cool, and kind of that transition from her going from where she was to where she is, getting those powers, being that superhero that everyone knows she can be. And I thought she was solid in Infinity War and Endgame. I don't love her in this film. I feel like there are certain things about the way she plays this character, and I could put a lot of this on the script, so I may not put as much on her, but there were some things that just didn't work about this performance for me, and that keeps me from putting it higher. It's also not the most rewatchable Marvel movie. Some throwaway moments and a third act that was just, it was fine, it was there, you don't remember the villain all that much, but things about her story arc that work extremely well, and there are some characters in here that are memorable. It's just the moments, not as much, so I'm looking forward to her second film. I'm going to put her first film on the okay tier. Black Panther, a movie that I love up until the final act. I found the final act of this film to be somewhat mediocre compared to the first two acts that take T'Challa on a really compelling journey. And what Boseman's able to do as this character works extremely well for me. But Michael B. Jordan coming in and almost stealing the entire show. Amazing performance. Performances across the board that are just top-notch. The cast is awesome. The visual style of this movie from Ryan Coogler, I believe this is one of the better scores in a comic book movie. Göransson's, constant, consistent, the drums coming in and amplifying these action scenes and those epic one-on-one battles that we get in this film. The moment that T'Challa loses his crown, essentially, oh my God, amazing. Like, those moments are incredible. I go back and I revisit this film, and the more I watch that third act and how rubbery the characters look, and it does partially take away, but you know what? It still goes on the great tier because I believe it's a great film. Black Widow. I watched Black Widow, and I had some fun with it. I felt as if it was an entertaining movie with entertaining characters. David Harbour, yes. Florence Pugh, yes. Some really great and memorable scenes, especially between these two sisters. And you guys know me, a good brotherly or sisterly story, something that can get personal like that, emotional on that level. Yes, that works. And scaled down how it was in the first act, Black Widow was genuinely compelling. And then it starts to get bigger and bigger until the final act, to where it just goes so completely overboard, tonally, and also looking at scale, that it takes away from the first two acts. And Taskmaster as a villain, just not all that compelling, especially looking at Taskmaster in the comics. Not necessarily the twist with the character, that's fine, but you have to make it a compelling character. And I found the third act to be one of the more unmemorable third acts. The more I thought about it, the more I disliked it, so it took my enjoyment down for sure. Still putting it on the okay tier, but I was definitely disappointed. Speaking of disappointment, I'm of two minds on Eternals. Eternals is actually compelling. Eternals has some great characters. Kumail Nanjiani steals the show. Chloe Zhao's direction shines through at points in this film. And honestly, I knew the characters from the comics, so I was never confused. I saw a lot of people say they were confused, and I completely understand, because the movie jumps back and forth. I still don't know why it does it on the level that it doesn't, but it does it. So when I say the storytelling didn't work as well as I wanted it to, it doesn't come down to confusion, it comes down to the script. And the script for this film, the screenplay overall, I'm just like, I don't know why it's put together in that way. I got it. I get it. Maybe taking a couple of these dull scenes out and implementing some more entertaining scenes, because this movie likes to sit back and do a lot of the talking, and some of those talking scenes weren't as compelling as they needed to be. Some of them are great. Others, not as much. Now, I enjoy the final battle. I love the ending. I think the ending of Eternals is amazing. And it does start to make up for the shortcomings that I had earlier, but I wanted Eternals to be better than it was. Still like it more than a lot of people, that's evident, so I'm going to put it on the good tier, but it should have been higher. Austin, did you just put Eternals on the good tier? I did. You can't do anything to stop me. Next up, Shang Chi. This is a movie that I was very excited about, but I was also slightly hesitant. It wasn't my most anticipated of last year. I actually, I was looking more forward to Eternals than I was Shang-Chi, and then I watched Shang-Chi and I'm like, what's wrong with me? This movie was so much fun, way more fun than Eternals, way more fun than some of these other origin stories in the MCU. Destin Daniel Cretton, what he does with this film is really cool because he brings this visual style. Well, obviously, Bill Pope, he is partially to blame for that. But everyone coming together and delivering on those visuals, it's impressive what Shang-Chi does. Now, my first time walking out of the theater, I'm like, the third act, it's a little overboard and it's magical and you have the dragon and all this crazy. The second time I watched this movie, I said, what was wrong with me that first time? Because the third act worked so well for me, right? They do start to implement that humor that feels out of place in those moments, but it's fewer and farther in between than maybe I thought it was going to be. But it's his journey. It's his relationships. Aquafina, I watched the trailers. I'm like, and then she's good in the movie, right? A little overboard in the third act, but she's rock solid. Everyone is rock solid in this film. They set us up for some great things in the future. He's one of my most anticipated characters now. He's going actually very close to the awesome tier, but I'm still going to put him on great for now. What If was genuinely a great experience some of the time. And then there were other times, other episodes, if you will, because every episode is different. This is an issue with ranking this because it's kind of hard to do that. I'm like, Doctor Strange episode, fantastic. The Thor episode, not as much, right? And it felt like that back and forth all the way up until the end. And I like the fact that they brought them together and it was fun. But even down to the fact that I'm listening to this and it's different voices for certain characters, it's okay. I understand that you have to do that. But some of those moments were so overly ridiculous that I didn't feel like they belonged in the MCU, right? And that's criticizing a bit too harshly, but I just didn't love certain episodes. Now, the Doctor Strange, the zombie, and the finale, I'm having a great time with. So to balance those two things out, I'm still going to put What If on the good tier. I love the idea of this show, just some inconsistent episodes. We're going to go into the next show on this list, and that is The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Maybe my most anticipated of all of the series that were announced for Disney+. And you know what? I was disappointed because I wanted greatness. Now, what I got was goodness. John Walker, really good, interesting character. Love the storyline. Great. Falcon and Winter Soldier, these two characters coming together, the bond that they share. There were some moments that slowed down in this show. Now, some of the time for good reason. Other times, it just kind of took away from the pacing. But you go into that villainous storyline, and the Flag Smashers, they just, frankly, they stink as villains. They're not good villains. They're unmemorable, and you can tell that there was a storyline there that, unfortunately, they took out due to COVID. That's the rumor. I'm going with that because it feels like it while you're watching the series. So massive disappointment there, which is a big reason why I'm putting this on the good tier. But it's still worth watching for sure. And the action scenes are super fun. WandaVision. Come on, man. This is an easy show to recommend because it's so distinctly different from anything else in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And people have been giving face for a hard time, and understandably so. There have been some disappointments. WandaVision was not a disappointment for me. It was actually significantly better than I thought it was going to be because of the creativity and the artistry behind what they were doing with each episode. But even when they moved past that in like episode 5 and, well, I guess it was 6 or maybe it was 7, where they go beyond the decade thing and, you know, the cinematography changes for every episode. When it starts to get kind of cliche and conventional Marvel, I was still invested because I loved Agatha. I loved so many things about the show. Listen, the finale, the Ralph Boner moment, I did not like. You guys know I'm not a fan of that. I've talked about it, but that's really the only major nitpick I have with the series. Some of those swerves, twists, and turns did not deliver, but the rest of the show does, and it knocks it out of the park almost every episode. I'm going awesome tier for WandaVision. Truly awesome show. Next up is Hawkeye, and I think I enjoyed Hawkeye more than a lot of people did. And I'm not going to sit back and act like the finale was the best thing I've ever seen because, again, they do lean too heavily into that cheese. But to strip down Clint Barton like they do in this series and then form this relationship between he and Kate Bishop, dive into his character, have the Christmas setting and the charm and that warm feeling you get while watching this series, it doesn't really feel like any other Disney show in that way. Yeah, you got the conventional cliche jokes and that stuff, but it was so much fun. And then the end sequences, the fight scenes in that finale, they were just so thrilling. What they did with Kingpin's character, okay, and I did want more from Echo. Not Echo yet, but she's going to be Echo. I'm not even entirely sure why she was in it. But overall, I had a great experience while watching this, and I'm going to put Hawkeye on the great tier. That's a little different from a lot of people. Loki. I don't have a bad thing to say about this show other than episode 3. Episode 3 is the only reason why I'm not moving this higher when I do my final ranking at the end of the video. I think Loki is a fantastic sci-fi show. It's like Twilight Zone meets Marvel Cinematic Universe meets time travel. I mean, it's everything. It's everything you want in an enjoyable show with compelling characters, the introduction of an amazing villain, but they build up to that so beautifully and meticulously, and Sylvie is just such a wonderful character, and all the different Lokis and Richard E. Grant's performance and Tom Hiddleston. I could talk about it for days. Episode 3 is a little boring. Sure, I can get behind that, didn't love it, but I'm not going to let it take away from my overall just enthusiasm about where this show goes. It was awesome. They knocked the finale out of the park. It's going on the awesome tier. Absolutely. And next up is Moon Knight. And I'll be honest with you guys. I went back and I rewatched Moon Knight just for this video, and I enjoyed it. It was good. I may have oversold it a little bit my first time watching it, because those first 4 episodes, there are really high highs, but there are also lows that don't come together as well as they should. And then I look at some of the visual effects in that first episode, and there were just a handful of moments that I look at, I'm like, that could have been executed better. I take nothing away from Oscar Isaac's performance. He is just as good, if not better, than any other actor over the last 5 years in a Marvel movie or TV show. I will stand by that until the end of the day. But you look at the way the story comes together, trying its best to capture the madness of the comics, but not truly doing that. And then the action sequences in this show. I thought the finale was really a great episode, but in the midst of that finale, you get some action sequences that are just, not as great as they should have been. And Moon Knight was like, is it going to be Batman in the MCU? And it just wasn't. From the action to capturing that darkness. Now, granted, not everything's going to be that darkness, and I think season 2, if we get one, is going to be darker. But I was a little bit more disappointed watching it back for a second time. Still enjoy it. Still love the performances, and I think some of this mythology just works extremely well. And that big twist in the midst of the season is phenomenal. I just wish it would have leaned a bit less into the MCU isms, which is why I'm going on the good tier for Moon Knight. We're going to keep this short and simple. You know how I feel about the Avengers movies, and you know how I feel about the first Avengers, which was an all-time theatrical experience. I can't put it on the all-time tier because the more I watch the film, the less I'm enthused about the filmmaking, the less I can sit back and say, Joss Whedon was the perfect director for that. Now, this movie changed the landscape of cinema. 100%. Nothing had ever been accomplished on this level in terms of bringing movies together, bringing characters together. Like, that stuff's from the comics. They can't do that in a live-action movie. It changed the game. And that's why every other company now is trying to do these big universes. They're trying to do spin-offs, all these crazy things. The first Avengers did that. I do feel as if the Russo brothers have a better handle on these grand-scale movies, but you can say this one maybe feels a bit more comic booky, so that works in its favor. Regardless, not a bad thing to say about the first Avengers. Now, the second Avengers, people give this film a hard time. For a lot of people, I'd say it would be on the okay or the meh tier. And I get that, right? Disappointing compared to the first, not on the level of the first. But I'm still going to go, and you'll see where I go, but I'm still going to be a bit more positive on Age of Ultron, because even though Ultron was slightly disappointing, he's still menacing. Even though it's kind of a retread of the third act of the first, it's still fun. And I enjoy so many moments, and these deep conversations we get to have with our characters, and these moments between someone like a Steve Rogers and a Tony Stark, where they're kind of building up to Civil War, and you feel those stakes, which is why I'm going Age of Ultron on the good tier. Infinity War, Endgame, Infinity War. Look, you've seen these. I've done these videos countless times. You know how I feel, and you know how most people feel. The fact that they brought it home. Not only did they bring it home, they nailed it. And to give us a finale this satisfying. Now, Infinity War, I wouldn't use the word satisfying. I'd use the word terrifying, because it was telling things from Thanos' perspective, and the way that they leave us off the cliffhanger. If we lived in 1980, we never would have known if these characters were coming back for Endgame or not. And unfortunately, behind-the-scenes stuff and people saying things and the internet just going crazy in the industry that I'm in, we knew, but it didn't take away anything for me. And I still think the movie flows so beautifully, which is why it's going on the all-time tier. And then to complete the Russo brothers quadrilogy, you have to talk about Endgame. It's funny because I think Infinity War is probably the better film. Endgame may be the more satisfying experience. Obviously, no crazy cliffhanger, but as an entire package, right? 3 distinct acts. The build-up, the time travel, and the finale and finality. All 3 are great. You can pick apart the time travel all you want. I could care less. I'm putting Avengers Endgame on the all-time tier. And we're going to end off with the Thor films because we're building up to Love and Thunder, starting with the first, which I think gets a bad rep. Going back to that underrated well, the first Avenger, Ant-Man, and now I would say Thor is an underrated film because it's a good movie. Is the romance the best we've ever seen? Not necessarily. Does it go a little overboard with the Dutch angles? Yeah, you know this. Everybody's always pointing at this movie and saying, Kenneth Branagh, what are you doing, man? So yeah, it's a little ridiculous. Some of the dialogue, the Destroyer is a throwaway character, but at the end of the day, it's all about that dynamic between he and Loki, the build-up, this grand Norse, and really the only Thor film to fully capture that Norse feeling. That mythology is alive. I think it's a rock-solid film. It's actually a good film, so I'm going to put it on the good tier. And then we go into Thor the Dark World and, taking a step down from a movie that was slightly entertaining and I'm sorry, it's just so boring. Malekith, it's just a boring movie. And I don't want to jump on the hate wagon. I don't think it's awful. I don't think Thor the Dark World is one of the worst comic book movies of all time. Just because a movie's dull doesn't mean it's tragically bad. That's not the case with this film. But I think of what all of the Marvel movies have done and what they all try their best to represent and the impact that each one of them has had. And Thor the Dark World's impact is the smallest. Now, Love and Thunder continues some story arcs that were established in Thor the Dark World, and, we revisit that in Avengers Endgame. But even with all of those things, the imprint is so minor, and then the film, the experience is just, Loki dies again, and obviously comes back, the villains stink, the third act, they go through some portals, and I'm just like, that's fine, but what was even the mission? I don't remember the mission. I don't remember it. Not one of the worst comic book movies ever made, but it is going to go on the bad tier because I think the Dark World, it's bad. Thor Ragnarok. It's funny because you go on every single website and there's high raving reviews for this film, and it seems like the consensus is that everybody loves it. But I keep getting comments of people who hate Ragnarok, and I'm like, where is this anywhere else? Maybe it's just the vocal minority. Now, there have been some good criticisms on Ragnarok to where I understand them. I don't agree. I actually wholeheartedly disagree, but I get it. But when you look at what Ragnarok is able to do for me personally, it's make Thor interesting again because the Dark World stinks. So that character is finally getting this arc that is, it's nice, it's refreshing for someone like Thor. And yeah, you start to make him the butt of the joke if he continues in that direction. We're getting closer to that with Love and Thunder, which is kind of like, oh, okay. But Ragnarok had a nice balance of that. It was still epic, and it maintained that epicness at the end when we get one of the coolest final battles in any superhero movie I've ever seen. Look, everybody has different opinions. I get it. But the more I watch Ragnarok, the more I love it. And the more I just unabashedly don't care. Who cares? It's great. It's not great. It's awesome. And it's easily on this tier. Thor Love and Thunder. You got the love. You got the thunder. Christian Bale is in this movie. That's pretty cool. The cast overall is incredible. Jane Foster, her role. I'm not going to spoil anything in this video for Thor Love and Thunder because it's not out yet. But the movie as a whole is stacked. Taika Waititi, I love him as a director. But I do think this is the first time that I've watched one of his films and I said, maybe he's going a little bit overboard with what he was trying to do. I still like it. It's enjoyable. It's entertaining. And there were so many moments in this movie where I said, I absolutely love what they're doing. But there were also moments, specifically in the first act of this film, to where I said, he's not nailing it, and he keeps doing it. He keeps going back to that well, and because he keeps going back to that well, I'm starting to get concerned about the rest of the film. And I kept asking that question, Are they going to bring it home? Are they going to bring it together? I actually enjoy where the second act goes, and as the emotions get higher and higher, the movie gets better. The humor's not quite working. Let's go in a little bit of a different direction. Even the screaming goats thing for me, like, kids are going to love it. That's fine. I'm watching. I'm like, yeah, it's okay. But the emotions of this film, and respect Waititi for the fact that he committed to this being a full-on romantic comedy. It's a Thor movie, yes. There's some great action scenes, the black and white one with gore specifically, yes. But it's a rom-com, and not everyone loves rom-coms, so not everyone's going to love this movie. And I get it. I thoroughly enjoyed myself, and I think the third act is truly great. What Waititi does here, and Gore's story arc specifically, Jane's story arc specifically, both of those work well for me. I needed more Gore the God Butcher. I needed less jokies. I'm still going to put it, and I feel like this could get higher as time goes by, like Ragnarok, but right now, because of my issues, I'm going to throw it on the good tier. We'll see what happens. A lot of people are going to ask the question, Austin, where is Miss Marvel? Well, I wanted to release this when Thor released. So yeah, you could have waited a week. Sure, but I wanted it out this week. So it's not fair for Miss Marvel for me to put it on this list without the finale. I'm leaving it off for now, but obviously we're going to do this again and again and again. So let's rank what we have now at the bottom. Obviously, Thor the Dark World, and I like the order that we have with Hulk and Iron Man 2 on that meh tier. On the okay tier, I'm going to throw Captain Marvel at the bottom, keep Black Widow in that spot, and have Ant-Man and the Wasp at the top of that one. On the good tier, we're actually going to go What If because of that inconsistency at the bottom, followed by the first Thor, which is good, but not as good as these other films. And then one that I've warmed up on over the years, Iron Man 3. Followed by Iron Man 3, we have Eternals, which was disappointing, but I still enjoyed it. Falcon and the Winter Soldier is the next TV show on this list. Avengers Age of Ultron, better than people give it credit for. And let's go Moon Knight. I'm putting Moon Knight slightly below Multiverse of Madness because Guardians 2 is just a little more fun, but they're both really enjoyable. Thor Love and Thunder on the top of the good tier. I need to see it several more times before my mind is made up. On the great tier, Hawkeye right where it needs to be. Spider-Man Far From Home right above that. And I'm doing something a little crazy here. I'm putting Ant-Man above Spider-Man. It's different. We're switching it up just slightly this time around. Captain America, the first Avenger, a massively underrated film. Doctor Strange, the first one, which I enjoyed just a bit more. Black Panther, a film that nails it up until that final act. And then the first Spider-Man Homecoming. Shang Chi gets really close to that awesome tier. I love this movie the more that I watch it. And then we have the awesome tier where WandaVision is at the bottom just because the inconsistency of the finale. Otherwise, amazing show. The Avengers, lower than it used to be, but I still love it, clearly. Loki. Yeah, that's right. I think Loki may just be my favorite of the MCU shows so far. The first Iron Man, the OG, the one that changed the superhero landscape. Guardians of the Galaxy bringing together a crazy romp of a team and doing it in such an amazing way. Now, this is what I struggled with last time. Spider-Man No Way Home, Thor Ragnarok. Two movies that are doing exactly what they're trying to do. I still think I'm going to go Ragnarok slightly above No Way Home. Just watching both and loving both, it's like choosing between two children. And it's hard. On the all-time tier, Civil War at the bottom. That's definitive for me at this point. The next two, it's tough. It's tough, but I like it. I like Infinity War, I like Endgame, and I like Winter Soldier remaining, after all of these years, remaining at number one on my list. Now, I've switched it up a few times, and who knows? Maybe next time Infinity War takes that spot, but I'm always so content with seeing Winter Soldier at the top because I'm just like, it makes me happy. I love a small-scale film. That is one that's a good one. This is a long video. If y'all still here, man, you're the best. Hey, drop a thumbs up. That'd be great. Help the algorithm. comment the word banana and just throw everyone off. Because most of the people, they've left by now. They saw 5 minutes of me talking. They said, this dude, look at this guy. Look at this guy and his dumb, stupid mustache and his look, I just love talking about movies. I love talking about Marvel. People call me a shill, but I just love what I love. I love Marvel, I love DC, I love Star Wars. You can love things, you can love to love them, and I love to love them, but clearly not everything is great. So that's it. That's my list. I have to edit this now. And this is going to be a long, oof.